April 15, 1945. A field of mud and steel on the eastern edge of the Ruhr pocket. The world is ending in a symphony of noise. For 19-year-old Liesel Weber, a former literature student from Munster now designated a Flakhelferin, the sound has become a physical presence, a pressure against her skull that never relents. It is the relentless thunder of American artillery walking its way across the landscape, and the much closer, much more personal metallic cough of her battery's last operational 88mm flak gun. The air smells of cordite, wet earth, and the oily stench of fear. Liesel's hands are numb inside her thin wool gloves as she helps pass another 20-pound shell to the loaders. The gun, a beast of dark gray steel, bucks and roars, sending a round screaming into the low, bruised sky. It is a gesture of pure defiance. They are aiming at phantoms now. The Allied fighter bombers, the dreaded Jabos, have moved on. The real threat is on the ground. Through the skeletal remains of a shattered forest, she can see them, the low, menacing silhouettes of M4 Sherman tanks, churning the German soil into a liquid mess. Mehr munition. Schneller. Lieutenant Hess, a man whose face has aged 20 years in the past 2 weeks, barks the order. His voice is a raw, desperate thing, nearly swallowed by the din. More ammunition. Faster. But there is little left. The crates are nearly empty. The supply lines were severed days ago. The Ruhr, Germany's industrial heart, has become its tomb, a cauldron of encircled, starving soldiers and auxiliaries. The men around her, a mix of hardened veterans and pale-faced boys from the Volkssturm, move with the jerky, exhausted motions of marionettes. Anja, her friend from training, stumbles beside her, her face smudged with grease and dirt, her blonde hair matted under her helmet. They're getting closer, Anja mouths, her eyes wide. Liesel doesn't need the warning. You can feel it. The vibration in the ground is different now. It is no longer the distant rumble of a storm, but the shudder of an earthquake directly beneath your feet. A shell from one of the Shermans screams overhead and detonates in the trees behind them, showering their position with splinters and dirt. Someone screams. It is a high, thin sound that is cut off abruptly. Liesel ducks down, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. The propaganda posters had shown heroic defenders, smiling and resolute, holding back the tide. The reality is this: mud, noise, and the gnawing, hollow ache of hunger that has become her only constant companion. They haven't had a proper meal in a week. Their rations are boiled nettles and a sliver of hard bread that tastes of sawdust. The world has shrunk to this single, muddy gun pit, a tiny island of resistance about to be swallowed by a steel ocean. The 88 fires again. And then again. The loaders work with a desperate, furious energy. But it's no use. Another Sherman lurches into view, its long 76mm cannon swinging towards them. There is a flash of orange, a deafening crack, and the world dissolves into a concussion of white light and roaring sound. Liesel is thrown backwards, her helmet torn from her head. She lands hard in the slick mud, the air knocked from her lungs. For a moment, there is only a high-pitched ringing in her ears. The great gun beside her is silent, its barrel twisted at a grotesque angle. Lieutenant Hess lies nearby, his face a mask of disbelief, his body unnaturally still. Through the smoke, figures emerge. They are tall, clad in unfamiliar olive drab uniforms, their faces grim under their distinctive helmets. They hold their rifles M1 Garands, she recognizes from the training charts with a casual readiness that is terrifying. An American soldier, his face young and covered in freckles, shouts something she doesn't understand. The words are guttural, alien. Then he gestures with his rifle. Up. Get up. Slowly, shakily, Liesel gets to her knees. She sees Anja doing the same. The surviving gun crew members are dropping their weapons, raising their hands in a gesture of universal surrender. The fight is over. The noise has stopped. In the sudden, ringing silence, a new fear begins to bloom, cold and sharp. The war, for her, has ended. But a new, terrifying uncertainty has just begun. She looks at the face of the American soldier standing over her. It is not the face of a monster from a propaganda film. It is just the face of a tired boy, a long way from home. And in his eyes, she sees not hatred, but a profound and weary emptiness that mirrors her own. The transition from combatant to captive is brutally swift. One moment, Liesel is part of a gun crew, a cog in the Wehrmacht's failing war machine. The next, she is being prodded into a line with the others, her hands clasped behind her head. The American soldiers move with an efficient, detached professionalism. They confiscate the few personal items they find: a pocketknife from one of the old Volkssturm men, a locket from another. They are not cruel, merely impersonal. It is this impersonality that is so chilling. She and the others are no longer individuals, they are the logistical problem of a conquering army. They are marched away from the shattered gun emplacement, joining a larger column of prisoners trudging down a muddy road. It is a river of gray uniforms, a defeated army in motion. There are thousands of them. Old men with haunted eyes, boys who should be in school, and pockets of women like herself, Flakhelferinnen, nurses, communication auxiliaries. The sheer scale of the collapse is staggering. The rumors of the encirclement were true. They are all caught in the trap. The gray tide flows west, towards the Rhine, under the watchful eyes of their American guards. No one speaks. The only sounds are the squelch of thousands of boots in the mud, the occasional shouted order from a guard, and the low, persistent rumble of military traffic on a nearby road. M3 half-tracks and GMC trucks, laden with fresh American troops and supplies, grind past their column, heading east into the heart of what was once their country. The GIs on the trucks stare at them, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, pity, and contempt. Some of them hold up small cameras, capturing the image of Germany's defeat. Liesel keeps her eyes fixed on the back of the woman in front of her, trying to make herself as small as possible, to disappear into the anonymous mass. The hunger, which had been a dull ache during the adrenaline of combat, now returns with a vengeance. It is a sharp, twisting pain in her stomach, a physical manifestation of their absolute helplessness. Anja walks beside her, her head bowed, her steps a slow, agonizing shuffle. "Where are they taking us?" Anja whispers, her voice hoarse. "Does it matter?" Liesel replies, the words tasting like ash. "Away from here." After what feels like an eternity, the column is directed off the road and into a vast, open field bordered by freshly strung barbed wire. It is a temporary collection point, one of dozens springing up across the countryside. There are no shelters, no latrines, no facilities of any kind. Just an expanse of churned mud under a sky the color of lead. They are herded into a designated section and told to sit. The guards take up positions on the perimeter, their rifles held ready. As the afternoon light begins to fade, a cold, damp wind sweeps across the field. Liesel pulls her thin greatcoat tighter around her shoulders, but it offers little protection. The mud seeps through her trousers, cold and invasive. They huddle together for warmth, a miserable cluster of humanity stripped of rank, purpose, and dignity. She watches the Americans. They seem to have an endless supply of everything. They eat from small cans, smoke cigarettes, and talk amongst themselves in their strange, confident language. They are victors. They belong to a world that still functions. Liesel and the others belong to a world that has ceased to exist. Their nation is in ruins, their leaders are in hiding, and their army has dissolved into this pathetic, muddy field. The future is a terrifying blank. As darkness falls, the temperature drops further. The prisoners murmur amongst themselves, their voices low and fearful. Rumors spread like a contagion: they will be shipped to America, sent to labor camps in Siberia, or simply left here to starve. Liesel tries to block it out, focusing instead on the singular, overwhelming sensation of her own body, the cold that seeps into her bones and the ravenous hunger that feels like it is consuming her from the inside out. She closes her eyes, but all she can see are the faces of the American soldiers, their expressions unreadable, holding the power of life and death in their hands. The sun sets on her first day as a prisoner of war, leaving her in a darkness far deeper than the coming night. Corporal Frank Miller of the 79th Infantry Division rested his M1 rifle against a stack of ammunition crates and watched the prisoners. From his vantage point near the field's makeshift gate, he could see the whole sorry spectacle. Thousands of them, a sea of grey and feldgrau, huddled in the mud as the last light bled from the sky. He'd seen a lot in the last few months, coming all the way from Normandy, but the sheer number of surrendering Germans in the Ruhr pocket was something else. It wasn't a battle anymore, it was a mass processing. Miller was a farm boy from Iowa. He was 20 years old, and the straightest furrow he'd ever plowed seemed a world away from this German mud. His job now was to stand guard, to make sure this mass of defeated humanity didn't get any ideas. But looking at them, he didn't see a threat. He saw exhaustion. He saw kids his age, and old men who looked like his grandfather. And he saw the women. There was a group of them, maybe 20 or 30, clustered together not far from his post. They wore the same gray uniforms as the men, but they looked even more out of place, their faces pale and gaunt in the twilight. He'd heard them called Flakhelferinnen, girls who manned the anti-aircraft guns. He had a sister back home, Betty, who was about their age. The thought made his stomach clench. He watched them, shivering in the cold, their eyes vacant with hunger and shock. The army's quartermaster was overwhelmed. There were simply too many prisoners to feed properly. The plan, as he understood it, was to give them the bare minimum until they could be moved to more permanent camps. But the bare minimum looked a lot like nothing. Frank felt a pang of something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't pity, exactly. It was more a sense of profound wrongness. War was supposed to be about soldiers fighting soldiers. This just felt like watching people starve. He thought about the sear rations stacked in the back of a nearby supply truck. He thought about the endless crates of canned goods, the sustenance of the U.S. Army. An idea, simple and direct, formed in his mind. He walked over to the truck and spoke briefly with the driver, another corporal from Ohio. After a moment of negotiation, he walked away with a half-dozen cans. He returned to his post and sat on a crate, pulling a P-38 can opener from the chain around his neck. With a few practiced motions, he hooked the tiny tool onto the rim of a can and worked his way around it, peeling back the lid. The contents were bright yellow kernels packed in water. Whole kernel sweet corn. To Frank Miller, it was one of the most familiar, comforting things in the world. It was the taste of summer cookouts, of Sunday dinner, of home. It was good, honest food. He stood up, holding two of the open cans. He walked towards the barbed wire, towards the cluster of women. As he approached, they fell silent. All eyes turned to him. They watched his every move with a mixture of fear and suspicion. He stopped a few feet from the wire. He held out one of the cans. He didn't know a word of German beyond hand hoch. So he just smiled, a small, hesitant gesture. "Here," he said softly, knowing they wouldn't understand the word. "Food." Liesel watched the American soldier approach. He was the young one with the freckles she'd seen earlier. Her body tensed. What did he want with them? He stopped and held out a small metal can. She could see the contents. Yellow kernels. A low murmur went through the women around her. Liesel stared, her mind struggling to process the image. It was corn. Maize, Anja whispered beside her, her voice filled with a sudden, sharp contempt. Corn. That's what you fed the pigs. It's what you fattened the cattle with before slaughter. It was animal feed. In all her life, Liesel had never known a human being to eat this. The soldier was not offering them food. He was mocking them. He was holding out a can of fodder to show them what he thought they were, animals in a pen. A wave of hot, bitter humiliation washed over her, so powerful it momentarily eclipsed her hunger. She saw the same look of dawning outrage on the faces of the other women. One of them spat on the ground. Another turned her back in a gesture of pure disgust. The American soldier stood there, holding out his offering, his face a mask of complete and utter confusion as their silent, collective rejection hit him like a physical blow. The moment stretched into a tense, silent tableau. On one side of the wire, Corporal Frank Miller, holding a can of perfectly good Iowa sweet corn, his expression of goodwill curdling into bewilderment. On the other, a score of German women, their faces etched with a mixture of prideful anger and deep, biting shame. The wind whispered across the muddy field, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant smell of diesel fumes. To Frank, the rejection was baffling. It was food. They were starving. What was wrong with them? He gestured again, miming the act of eating, pointing from the can to his mouth. Good, he said, mangling the German word for good he'd picked up. Essen. Food. His clumsy attempt only deepened their conviction. To them, his pantomime was part of the insult, a crude demonstration for creatures he considered too stupid to understand. Liesel felt Anja's hand grip her arm. Don't look at him, Anja hissed. He's a pig. They are all pigs. But Liesel couldn't look away. She watched the American's face. She saw the furrow in his brow, the genuine confusion in his eyes. There was no smirk, no cruelty, no mockery. There was only incomprehension. He looked like a boy who had offered a stray dog a piece of his sandwich, only to have it snarl at him. Her stomach gave a violent, painful twist. The gnawing emptiness inside her was an agony that transcended pride. For days, she had subsisted on watery nettle soup and crumbs of bread. Her body was screaming for sustenance. She looked at the bright yellow kernels in the can. She thought of the pigs on her uncle's farm, snorting happily as they devoured buckets of the stuff. The humiliation was a physical thing, a burning in her cheeks. But the hunger was a deeper, more primal force. It was the engine of survival, and it was beginning to overpower everything else. What if he wasn't mocking them? The thought was a tiny, fragile seed in the barren soil of her despair. What if this was what they ate? The idea was absurd, alien. But the Americans were an alien people. They came from a different world, a world of unimaginable wealth and plenty, a world where they could afford to send millions of men across an ocean with trucks and tanks and endless cans of this. Propaganda had told her they were barbarians. Experience had taught her they were ruthlessly efficient soldiers. But this gesture, this strange, insulting, confusing gesture, what was it? She looked from the soldier's earnest face to the can he held out, and then to the faces of her comrades, set in rigid lines of defiance. And in that moment, a desperate curiosity, born of pure animal need, won out over honor, over shame, over everything. Slowly, deliberately, she untangled her arm from Anja's grasp. Liesel, nein, Anja whispered, her voice sharp with alarm. Hör auf. Stop. But Liesel didn't stop. She took a step towards the wire, then another. The other women stared at her, their expressions a mixture of shock and betrayal. She was breaking rank. She was accepting the enemy's insult. She reached the wire, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked the American corporal in the eye, and then, slowly, she extended a trembling hand through the barbed wire. Her fingers were caked with mud, her nails broken. She hesitated for a fraction of a second, then plunged her fingers into the can. The kernels were cool and slick. She scooped up a small portion and brought it to her lips. The smell was faintly sweet. She closed her eyes and put the corn in her mouth. She expected the tough, starchy texture of feed corn. She expected it to be tasteless, a chore to chew. Instead, her teeth sank into something soft. And then, a burst of flavor exploded on her tongue. It was a sweetness she had not tasted in years. It was clean and rich and utterly, astonishingly delicious. Her eyes shot open. It was not animal feed. This was food. Real food. A quiet, profound shock coursed through her. She looked at the American, her expression of defiance melting away into one of pure, unadulterated surprise. She took another, larger scoop from the can, this time without hesitation. As she chewed, she turned to look at Anja and the others. She didn't have to say a word. The truth of the moment was written all over her face, a silent, powerful testament that shattered their certainty and left them standing in stunned, hungry silence. For a few heartbeats, no one moved. The only sound was Liesel quietly, almost mechanically, eating the corn from her hand. The other women stared, their faces a canvas of conflicting emotions. Anja's look of angry pride dissolved into confusion, then into a dawning, desperate understanding. The American soldier, Corporal Miller, simply watched, his tense posture relaxing as he finally saw the acceptance he had expected. He pushed the can a little further through the wire, a silent offering for more. Then, the dam broke. It began with one of the younger girls, a Berliner no older than 17, who took a hesitant step forward. Then another woman followed. Soon, a small, tentative group had gathered near Liesel at the wire. Hands, some trembling, some steady, reached out. Miller, realizing the scope of the need, quickly fetched the other cans he had opened. He passed them through the wire, and the women shared them, scooping out the kernels with their fingers, their movements urgent but not frantic. A strange, quiet ritual was taking place in the German twilight. There was no chatter, no exchange of thanks. There was only the sound of eating, the soft noises of people so hungry that the act of consumption was a singular, all-consuming focus. Liesel finished her portion and stepped back, allowing others to take her place. She felt the sweetness of the corn on her tongue, a small, potent burst of life in the landscape of death and defeat. It was more than just calories. It was a message. A confusing, unintentional message, but a message nonetheless. Their captors were not monsters bent on their humiliation. They were just people. People from a land so rich they could pack summer into a can and eat it in the middle of a war. Miller, seeing the cans were nearly empty, turned and trotted back to the supply truck. He returned minutes later, his arms loaded with more cans of corn, and also peaches, and tins of processed cheese. He didn't try to open them all. He simply set them down by the wire, along with a few P38 openers, a gesture of trust. He showed one of the older women how the small, ingenious tool worked, guiding her hands. She learned quickly, and soon the women were opening the cans for themselves. The simple act of providing food began to thaw the frozen atmosphere of fear and hostility. It did not create friendship. It did not erase the fact that they were prisoners and he was their guard. But it created a small, temporary space of shared humanity. A space where the complex machinery of war was reduced to its most basic components, hunger and the quenching of it. Liesel watched Corporal Miller as he resumed his post, leaning against the ammunition crates. He lit a cigarette, the flare of the match briefly illuminating his young, tired face. Their eyes met across the muddy ground. There were no words they could share. The gulf between their languages, their experiences, their worlds, was too vast to be bridged by a simple phrase. But Liesel, her stomach now filled with a warmth that was more than just food, gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of understanding, of a gratitude too complex for words. Miller saw it. He took a drag from his cigarette and nodded back, a slow, simple gesture of his own. That was all. The exchange was over. The night grew deeper and colder. The women, with something in their stomachs for the first time in days, huddled together, the immediate, gnawing terror of starvation momentarily abated. They were still prisoners in a muddy field at the heart of a ruined nation. Their future was a terrifying unknown. But for a few brief moments, a simple can of corn had pierced through the dehumanizing fog of war. It had revealed not enemies, not conquerors, or captives, but just people, caught on opposite sides of a tragedy, sharing a quiet moment of grace before the uncertain dawn.